All right, welcome back, Life Science. Today I'm going to cover the second part of section 10.3, looking at basically how do seed plants reproduce and then parts of a flower. And so yesterday was about seedless plants and alternation of generation, where an organism can be multicellular but have haploid number of chromosomes in their cells, and they can also be multicellular and be diploid. And so seed plants, a little bit different. Their haploid generation is located within a diploid tissue. So that is one key difference between seed plants and seedless plants. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the male side, then the female side, and then kind of how they all work together. So the pollen grain is formed from the male reproductive structure of a seed plant. Pollen grain you can kind of think of as like sperm cells of a plant. And these sperm cells can move in a variety of ways, either by wind, animals. We call those animals that pick up pollen grains and transmit them to other parts or a different flower or different plants, pollinators, okay? Gravity, falls to the ground, or water. And so when a pollen grain does land on a female reproductive structure, we call that pollination. So it kind of makes sense that if animals help transfer that pollen from one plant to another, we call them pollinators, and then that process is called pollination when it actually occurs. This picture right down here is an electron microscope picture of pollen, and you can see pollen comes in a variety of shapes and sizes. People that suffer from allergies, it's basically your immune system attacking these foreign objects, that might get into your eye or cause the symptoms of allergies. Now on the female side, we call it the ovule. Okay, this is where the egg, and this egg is haploid, develops until fertilization occurs. So when fertilization occurs, basically pollen meets haploid egg or ovule, a zygote forms and will turn into an embryo. And an embryo is just this immature plant. So zygote first, then embryo. So embryo is just an immature plant. The embryo will produce, will be covered or protected by a seed. So when you have an embryo, a food supply, because that's what seeds are, there's lots of nutrients and food supplies for them, and a protective covering, which we call the seed coat, now you have a seed. So that's what a seed is. It's an immature plant inside of a seed coat with some food supplies. And the food supply just provides nourishment for early growth until it breaks the surface in the process of germination and can start to do photosynthesis on its own. So this picture down here is showing an ovule. If I were to take a flower and cut it in half, and I'd see this is a cross section. These are ovules, okay, haploid egg development, and then eventually that can turn into a seed depending on the species. All right, now remember we have two types of seed plants: gymnosperms and angiosperms. So I'm going to talk about flowerless seed plants first, which is the gymnosperms. Remember, there are 4 types of gymnosperms. We have like the conifers, the cycads, the ginkgophytes, and the genetophytes. And so these guys, they are, gymnosperm, remember, means naked seed. So our naked seed is a cone. The cones, there are male cones and female cones. So you can kind of see that the female cones grow in upper branches where they may be fertilized by pollen blown wind from the male cones. And the male cones usually are on the lower branches. They're a little bit papery or fleshy. The females are woody, berry-like, and produce eggs. So. In flower and seed plants, the flower holds both male and female parts. So I'll talk about the male part first. The male part is called the stamen, which is nice because if you look at that suffix, it's got the word men in it, so stamen is for male. And the stamen is actually made up of 2 parts: a filament supported, or a filament that supports an anther. So at the very tip of the stamen is the anther where the pollen grains are distributed from, and then the filament kind of connects the anther to the plant, so it's supported at the base. Now for the female side, we call it a pistil, okay? And I don't know how you want to remember the pistil is female, but a woman carrying a gun, I don't know, whatever. You come up with your own mnemonic devices, but stamen, male, pistil, female. And the pistil is also made up of a couple different parts. So the tip of the pistil is called the stigma. This is where the pollen grain will land, and then it's supported by a style, and at the very end of that style, at the base, you'll find your ovary. So here's a picture. Let's focus on the male first. So this these two structures right here, the anther and the filament, is called the stamen. Okay, the anther's at the top where pollen grains are released, and then the filament supports it to the flower. Now the female part is right here in the middle. The female reproductive part is called the pistil, at the very tippy of the stigma where the pollen grains can land. Here's the style, and at the end of the style at the very base is our ovary. Now some other parts of a plant that you should probably recognize are petals. A lot of times petals are used to attract pollinators to that plant, so pollen can be distributed. And then a lot of flowers actually have like these green, and I don't want to say they're petals, but they're green in color, and they're actually called sepals. Okay, so they're not petals, but they're like another layer of protective covering, but it's green in color. Okay, and I'm not sure if you need to know receptacle, but you definitely need to know ovary, sepal, style, stigma, petal, anther, filaments, and then the stamen is made up of both of these, and the pistil is made up of the stigma, style, and the ovary. So the life cycle of an angiosperm, we'll start with the pollen grain. Travels from the anther to the stigma, which is the tip of the female, where pollination occurs. And then a pollen tube will grow down to the ovary. So the pollen lands here, and it actually grows a tube all the way down to connect to the ovary. Sperm are released from the pollen tube, and they fertilize the egg. So we have a zygote, which is a diploid part. It's a diploid stage. It turns into an immature plant called an embryo, which will turn into a seed. And depending on if it's, well, this is an angiosperm, so a seed will develop inside of the ovary to become a fruit. So the parts that you eat of a fruit, think about apples or peaches, you know the seeds are in the middle. The stuff that you are eating, you're actually eating the plant ovaries, just so you know. Have a nice day, right? Okay, so here's the life cycle of the angiosperms. We'll start with the anther. Here's our pollen grain, lands on the female part stigma, growing that pollen tube, travels down to the ovary where fertilization can occur. Here's fertilization right here, so I was just jumping ahead of myself. So we have a fertilized egg cell that turns into an embryo and a seed, and we have our seed coat, and then maybe that seed gets dispersed somehow where it turns into a baby seedling, and it can become an adult organism, and the process can repeat itself. Okay, so that does it for Chapter 10. Your assignment is to finish the this assignment right here, the alternation of generation flower anatomy. Yesterday you should have completed this, and today you should be able to label the anatomy of the flower using these words down here and by filling in the blanks. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Tomorrow you guys will be taking an open note, open book test, and yeah, it's just, you'll just log on to Google Classroom and take it from Google Forms, and I think I'm going to give you all day to do that. So yeah, okay, let me know if you have any questions.